The line between inspiration and imitation is often hard to draw when it comes to video games. I've talked before about how sequels are fertile ground to iterate and expand on ideas from previous games, but of course this isn't limited to just the original developers. Once a game comes out that does something innovative, the idea will frequently start appearing in other games made by other people. Sometimes the mechanics are just a cheap copy of the original, but over time as different hands touch an idea it gets iterated on, experimented with. If enough developers adopt the idea, it can break free of its source material and become an established trope of video games or even a brand new genre. We don't say Doom clone anymore, we say first person shooter. And over the last few years we've seen a boom in the number of roguelike and Souls-like games being released. 2011's Bastion was a fantastic game with a bunch of unique ideas that really made it stand out, so it's not surprising that there will be imitators. But when it comes to stories, the path of Destinies, are we dealing with something that pushes those concepts forward, or just uses them as a crutch to make up for a lack of creativity?
Like the earth had ruptured over something that had been fermenting for a very long time.
Like Bastion, Stories is at its heart an isometric action game focused on combat with a little bit of light traversal puzzling thrown in for good measure, and a healthy dose of storytelling. You play as Reynardo, dashing air pirate, who despite his best efforts is drawn into a rebellion against the tyrannical emperor of the floating sky islands where the game takes place. Over the course of your adventures you'll visit ice-capped mountains, parched deserts, creep through war-torn cities and fly through the air as you infiltrate the Imperial Armada, all the while accompanied by the voice of the narrator who, like Bastion, dynamically reacts to your actions. All this adds up to a game that's well made and competent enough at what it does, but doesn't quite have the writing or mechanical depth to elevate it above its inspiration. The thing that makes Stories stand out is how it interprets the way Bastion ends. On finishing Bastion's story, the player is presented with a choice: either fly off into the sunset to live happily ever after, or reset time back to when the story began. As someone who very rarely replays games, I thought this was really clever. It gave a narrative reason for playing through the game a second time but keeping all your character progression intact, and thus I was able to fully explore the game's mechanics and see both endings in a way that I otherwise wouldn't. Stories takes that encouragement of a second playthrough and runs with it, expanding it out to the main mechanic of the game. In order to completely finish the story, you have to play through it many times, making different choices and taking different paths to uncover different story threads. Make the right choices and you might uncover one of the game's truths. These 4 facts are universally true across all possible stories, and allow you to make decisions and unlock narrative threads that were previously unavailable. By fully exploiting these truths, you finally get the story's equivalent of Bastion's sunset ending.
It was a no-brainer.
Beyond Bastion, Stories pushes forward in other areas as well. Like many other games in the last few years, the combat system is heavily influenced by Batman Arkham Asylum's style of combo and counter-based fighting. This style of combat, also seen in games like Shadow of Mordor and Mad Max, encourages the player to get into a rhythmic flow, chaining together precisely timed hits and being ready to counter or dodge different kinds of incoming attack. Stories subverts the established conventions of this system by having no dedicated counter button. Instead, the player must counterattack in the direction of the incoming enemy, immediately interrupting any other action they were doing.
I'm doing that, thought Reynardo.
This move away from animation priority means that the game doesn't always devolve into the Assassin's Creed style of fight scene, where enemies stand around you in a circle waiting their turn. The counterattack is a precision instrument, and the game challenges you to use it as it throws multiple enemies your way at once. Over time, new types of enemies are used to force you to mix up your tactics. Enemies carrying shields can only be hurt if you throw other enemies at them, or if you grab the shield away with your grappling hook. Bombers are fragile, but will explode a few seconds after being hit and require judicial use of the dash mechanic in order to get clear of the blast area. As you play and gather more resources, you'll eventually be able to craft new swords, each with their own special magic powers to be used in combat, which also act as keys to unlock the game's branching paths. Stories doesn't succeed in everything it tries, however. The narrator's dialogue falls well short of Bastion's sonorous storyteller, leaning a little too heavily on referential humour and silly puns.
And this is why heroes are called dashing, Reynardo thought. See? Dashing? Get it?
I really love aspects of the game's style, but it's very inconsistent. The storybook that is the game's focus has a beautifully striking woodcut look, and the parchment which keeps track of which stories you've seen shimmers with magical energy and sits between hand-carved wooden figures. This old-timey aesthetic is wonderful, but it clashes against the whimsical cartoon character portraits that appear in the game itself. Still, these are minor gripes that are mostly due to the incredibly high bar set by Bastion. Stories: The Path of Destinies is a great example of how to creatively mold ideas from other games to make something truly its own. It picks up on a small detail of another game and fully explores it, and remixes other familiar systems in a novel way. Whilst it might not elevate everything it takes from its influences, it's still worth playing for its engaging style and tightly woven story that kept me coming back for more, time after time.
Second star to the right, and straight on till morning. This time, he would win.